I call the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise today to speak on the Tax Laws Amendment Combating Multinational Tax Avoidance Bill 2015. The Turnbull Government is building an innovative and sustainable economy for a safe and secure Australia, and this bill, Deputy Speaker, is an important element of that. The bill implements three 2015-16 budget measures delivered by the former Treasurer Joe Hockey: multinational anti-avoidance law, country-by-country reporting and new transfer pricing documentation standards, and stronger penalties to combat tax avoidance and profit shifting. Deputy Speaker, if there's one thing the people in Durack loathe, and that is unfairness, and I would like to note the member for Macon's comments and using that perhaps we ought to be using words like thieves and crooks, and I happen to agree with him, because as we know, currently there are some multinationals operating in Australia who are not paying their fair share of tax, and I think crooks and thieves is a better description for them. These measures are part of a package of domestic measures announced in the 2015-16 budget to strengthen Australia's existing laws to ensure active multinationals in Australia pay their fair share of tax. Deputy Speaker, this bill is consistent with the government's, the Liberal parties and my values of making a fairer tax system. With multinationals avoiding paying their fair share, it has created an unfair playing field for local businesses who unfortunately lack the reach of these much larger organisations. Families and small businesses in Durack are therefore forced to shoulder more of the tax burden, which undermines confidence in the tax system. I personally would like to see tax rate cuts across the board, and I look forward to seeing recommendations from the tax white paper. The bill we're debating will allow the Commissioner of Taxation to treat these large multinationals as if they were having a taxable presence in Australia and therefore make them subject to Australian law. It applies to large multinationals with annual global revenue of $1 billion or more. This bill is expected to claw in billions of tax dollars, and the Australian Taxation Office has about 30 companies in mind that it will target under this law once passed. Deputy Speaker, we are targeting the largest multinationals not only because it is fair, but because it is these companies which have the greatest opportunities to avoid tax through offshore activities and represent the highest risk to Australia's tax base. Deputy Speaker, this bill goes to the heart of a key Liberal core value, and that is strong financial management. Despite the iron ore price more than halving and the weakening of other international economies, Australia remains on a credible path to surplus. As a new government, we inherited a $48 billion deficit, but the good news is that we are set to reduce this deficit by $10 billion this year. Directly as a result of our actions, gross debt in a decade will be $100 billion lower than we inherited 2 years ago. Deputy Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Minister for Trade, Andrew Robb, on negotiating Australia's participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. As you know, Deputy Speaker, the TPP, as we call it, is the largest global trade deal in the past 20 years. It will improve Australian trade across 20 different nations, which together make up 40% of the global economy. It will be of enormous benefit to my electorate of Durack in many industries, but particularly in the cattle industry. This is on top of the free trade agreements that Minister Robb's signed with Korea and Japan since coming to office. Additionally, if we can get the Labor Party to drop the politics and follow the advice by former Labor icons such as Bob Hawke, Kevin Rudd and Martin Ferguson, the China Free Trade Agreement will also be passed by the end of this year, growing the important industry of agriculture, as one example, by an estimated $300 million, which, Deputy Speaker, you will know is an incredibly important industry in my electorate of Durack. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is these deals which have led the way to the creation of some 12,500 new jobs in Durack since I was elected, and very pleasingly over 335,000 new jobs throughout Australia since this government was elected to office back in September 2013. Now, Deputy Speaker, as I've said earlier, the people of Durack loathe unfairness. There are more than 13,000 hardworking small businesses in Durack. It is simply not fair. These hardworking local small businesses do the right thing. They pay their fair share of tax, unlike the large multinationals that we're discussing today, who have enjoyed an unfair advantage. Deputy Speaker, I'm particularly proud that Australia has led on this global issue. As President of the G20 last year, Australia led the way on the OECD BEPS action plan to ensure multinational entities pay the right amount of tax. Under our country's leadership, the G20 delivered the first level of an action plan to address multinational tax avoidance. Following this work, this government announced a package of domestic measures in the 2015-16 budget. Deputy Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to put on record and fully acknowledge Joe Hockey's work with this particular matter. Mr Hockey worked hard to ensure that these multinationals operating in Australia start at last to pay their fair share. Deputy Speaker, pleasingly, the Turnbull Government is going beyond the OECD recommendations. We are planning a voluntary transparency code by May next year. This code will enhance public confidence in the tax system and the community's understanding of the tax affairs of large companies. I'm pleased to say that this government is ensuring that the ATO has unprecedented resources to deal with international tax avoidance. We're providing an additional $87.6 million to the ATO over 3 years to investigate international tax avoidance. Deputy Speaker, to date, the program is estimated to raise over $1 billion in total, and I'm very pleased that this will be $1 billion which is going to help to start to pay down Australia's debt that we inherited from those on the other side. Under this bill, the government will prevent multinationals using complex schemes to avoid paying tax in the country by booking their revenue overseas. The stronger penalties measure of the tax law amendment will double the penalties applying to large companies engaging in tax avoidance or profit shifting. Durack, or indeed Australian businesses, won't be impacted, but for those who are operating illegally, be aware we're coming for you. And just remember, if you're not doing anything wrong, you will have nothing to fear from this new legislation. The government has been working closely with the business community, as well as tax professionals and academics for the past 2 years on the OECD's profit shifting agenda. We've consulted with stakeholders, including business practitioners, and of course the ATO, to help develop the legislation to ensure the law will not have unintended consequences. And to those opposite, I guess I will be surprised if they don't support this bill, as I know that they too would like to crack down on multinational tax avoidance. But let's be clear, it is this government which has an effective policy for direct action in this area. Deputy Speaker, only the Turnbull Government can cut down on large foreign multinationals not paying tax in Australia. And what we've heard today during this debate is that this bill will further minimise the tax burden already decreased by the government, especially for the hard-working business people of Durack and for the rest of Australia. It will end the unfair advantage that multinationals who are avoiding tax have over local businesses and create a standard of fairness not seen when we know the others were in charge. As I outlined earlier, we're targeting the largest multinationals because it is these companies which have the greatest opportunities to avoid tax and represent the highest risk to Australia's tax base. This is a very fair piece of legislation and I commend this bill to the House.
Thank the member for Durack.